This evening you can let the day loosen its grip. Put the phone a little farther away, settle your head into the pillow, and let the room grow dim, because I am here to help you fall asleep, and we will take this journey together. We will move slowly from wartime code rooms to modern machine intelligence, tracing a patient line through paper, wires, logic, secrecy, and the old dream that a machine might someday reason. Now imagine that you are stepping into a quiet room where lamps are shaded, typewriter keys click softly, and sheets of symbols wait on a wooden table. The air smells faintly of dust, hot metal, and tea gone cool. You are not here to watch a story about robots. You are here to walk through the long human effort to teach a machine a fragment of thought. You arrive first at the hottest edge of the story, though the room itself hardly seems dramatic. The windows are covered. The lamps are hooded. A clock ticks somewhere behind you with a patience that feels almost rude. On the table lie rows of intercepted letters, sheets filled with substitutions, guessed settings, tiny marks in pencil, and the kind of careful disorder that appears when exhausted people have been chasing order for too many hours. Outside, the war is loud in places you cannot see. Inside, the war has become symbols. A message has crossed the air. It has been caught, printed, arranged, doubted, tested, and now it waits for human eyes and mechanical help. You can hear the soft movement of paper, the low murmur of voices trained to say very little, and the repeated clack of a machine performing one narrow task again and again. In this moment, the future of artificial intelligence still has no proper name, and yet one of its deepest instincts is already present. The belief that thought can be broken into procedures, and that procedures can be shared between human beings and machines. Then the scene gently rewinds. To understand how the dream of thinking machines began, you have to leave the blackout room and step back into centuries that felt slower and more certain. You move away from the electric hum and into an earlier world of ink, wax, candle smoke, and hand-copied pages. Here the question is not yet whether a machine can think. The older question is simpler and somehow stranger. Can reasoning itself be organized? Can the mind be made legible? You find scholars trying to pin logic to the page as if it were a net they could hold up to the light. In the 17th century, men like Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz dream of a universal language of reasoning, a method by which disputes might be settled not only by rhetoric, but by calculation. When arguments become formal, perhaps they can be checked. When they can be checked, perhaps they can be mechanized. Leibniz imagines symbolic systems with the calm confidence of someone who senses a continent before anyone has mapped it. He cannot build modern computers. The materials do not yet exist. But the longing is there, a hope that intelligence may contain regularities, and that some of those regularities might be externalized. As you continue forward, you pass devices that look modest beside the mythology of the computer age. They are calculators with gears, stepped drums, levers, and polished metal. Some are useful, some fragile, some closer to demonstrations than daily tools. Yet each one whispers the same idea. Human thought does not happen all at once. Parts of it can be divided into steps. Arithmetic can be delegated. Tables can be produced. Repetition can be handed over. Blaise Pascal and Leibniz each contribute to the tradition of mechanical calculation, and behind them stands an even older history of counting boards, abacuses, astronomical instruments, and algorithmic habits learned long before electricity entered the scene. You begin to notice that machines do not have to resemble minds in order to affect how people imagine minds. Every time a repetitive operation is transferred from hand to mechanism, the boundary of the uniquely human shifts a little. A person who once believed calculation required something like spirit now watches brass do part of the work and must revise the picture. In the 19th century, the atmosphere changes again. Industry grows louder. Precision engineering improves. Administrative states expand, numbers multiply through trade, taxation, navigation, insurance, and science. It is here that Charles Babbage appears with his difference engine and the more ambitious analytical engine. As you stand near the plans and scattered components of these unfinished or only partially realized machines, what strikes you is not only their complexity, but their ambition. Babbage is not simply trying to build a faster calculator. He imagines a machine that can store numbers, manipulate them according to instructions, and produce results through a sequence of operations. In other words, he edges toward programmability. Near him, Ada Lovelace sees something that many others do not. She understands that if symbols can stand for quantities, they can also stand for things beyond quantity. Music, language, relationships, patterns, rules. A machine that manipulates symbols according to instructions might not be confined forever to arithmetic. Lovelace is careful. She does not say the machine originates thought the way a person does, but she recognizes that symbol manipulation can stretch farther than most of her contemporaries imagine. When later generations look backward for origins, they return to this quiet widening of possibility. The story then passes into the formalization of logic itself. George Boole transforms logical statements into algebraic forms. Gottlob Frege, Bertrand Russell, Alfred North Whitehead, Giuseppe Peano, David Hilbert, and others labor over the foundations of mathematics and reasoning, each with different aims and temperaments. But together they help produce something decisive, a way of representing thought more explicitly. Logical operations become symbolic operations. In the calm of libraries and lecture halls, with chalk dust floating in winter light, the old messiness of ordinary argument is reduced, at least in part, to systems of signs. Not every philosopher believes the mind can be captured this way, and not every mathematician expects machinery to grow from formal logic. Still, the ground is shifting. If valid inference can be described by rules, then rules need not remain trapped inside the skull. They can be written, checked, taught, and perhaps one day executed by something non-human. The history of artificial intelligence depends on this reduction, not because human beings are reducible in full, but because enough of reasoning can be formalized to make engineering possible. You drift into the early 20th century, and the mood becomes both more abstract and more urgent. The foundations of mathematics are under pressure. Questions about proof, consistency, completeness, and formal systems are no longer the private amusement of specialists. They matter because they reveal what rules can and cannot do. Kurt Gödel shows that formal systems powerful enough to express arithmetic contain truths that cannot be proven from within the system itself. Alonzo Church and Alan Turing, working in different forms, explore computability and effective procedures. Turing's abstract machine, spare and almost austere in imagination, turns out to be one of the clearest ways of describing what computation means. It is not yet a physical computer. It is a conceptual model. Yet precisely because it is so stripped down, it shows how rules, symbols, memory, and sequential operations can create a general process. Standing in this phase of the story feels strange. Nothing around you looks like the glossy future promised by later decades, and still the bones of the modern computational world are being assembled with extraordinary quiet. Now the war returns, and the temperature of ideas rises. Theory is not abandoned, but pressure changes the scale of effort. During the Second World War, governments pour resources into cryptography, ballistics, communication, logistics, and radar. Questions that once lived in journals and seminars now move into fenced compounds, research facilities, and rooms where secrecy sits heavier than smoke. You find yourself at Bletchley Park, but also by implication near American projects, British engineering sites, and the broader wartime network in which information becomes survival. Here, what matters is no longer only whether a calculation can be done, but whether it can be done in time. A code cracked tomorrow may save nothing tonight. The symbolic meets the urgent. People who might otherwise have spent their lives in pure mathematics now work at tables with cables, relays, punched cards, and disciplined guesswork. Their days are repetitive, and repetition is instructive. It reveals which parts of intellectual labor can be turned into procedures, and which must still remain stubbornly human. The famous machine stories often sound grander than their daily reality. You do not mostly see heroic poses. You see fatigue. You see tea growing cold beside stacks of forms. You see operators feeding paper through mechanisms, analysts comparing patterns, engineers improvising repairs, supervisors protecting secrecy so tightly that workers understand only fragments of the larger purpose. The machines themselves are large, warm, temperamental, and narrow. Colossus is not a mind, Bombi is not a mind. ENIAC is not a mind. Yet each one participates in an unsettling transfer. Tasks once associated with concentrated expertise begin to migrate, piece by piece, into electromechanical and electronic systems. When a machine tests possibilities faster than a room of people could manage unaided, it does not become intelligent in the human sense, but it does become intellectually consequential. It changes what intelligence can delegate. In the war years, that distinction matters more than abstract definitions. As you stand near these early systems, another transformation quietly unfolds. The machine is becoming more general. The stored program concept, associated with figures such as John von Neumann and others working across Britain and the United States, helps move computation away from fixed-purpose apparatus toward reprogrammable architecture. Instead of building a different physical structure for every kind of problem, engineers begin to imagine one machine that can take instructions and alter its behavior accordingly. This change is one of the deepest in the entire history. A calculator, however advanced, performs a class of tasks. A programmable computer hints at a broader horizon. It can sort data one moment, simulate trajectories the next, and manipulate symbols after that. The hardware remains primitive by modern standards. Memory is tiny, reliability is imperfect. Yet conceptually, the world has turned. Once a machine can be instructed at a general level, people inevitably begin asking whether some instructions might approximate activities once described as reasoning, learning, or decision-making. At the same time, the language of mind and the language of circuitry begin to touch. In 1943, Warren McCulloch and Walter Pitts publish a simplified mathematical model of neural activity. Their artificial neurons are severe abstractions, but the suggestion has enormous afterlife. Perhaps brains, too, can be approached as networks that combine signals through structured relationships. Around the same era, Claude Shannon shows how Boolean logic can be implemented in electrical circuits, turning what once seemed like the dry manipulation of symbols into something that can literally flow through switches. Information theory begins to formalize communication, uncertainty, and signal. Cybernetic thinking gathers force. You can feel the old divide between physical machinery and abstract thought narrowing, not because anyone has solved intelligence, but because several disciplines are beginning to speak a partially shared language. Symbols, signals, rules, feedback, thresholds, encoding before the electronic age fully arrives. There is also a quieter prehistory of programmability in textiles and industry. If you pause by the jacquard loom and watch patterned cloth emerge through punched cards controlling threads, you see a principle that later computer histories love to notice. Instructions can be encoded externally and replayed mechanically. The loom is not a reasoning machine, and no careful historian should pretend otherwise. But it demonstrates how complex output can arise from structured symbolic control. The card, the pattern, the repeatable sequence. These ideas migrate. They show that mechanism can be guided by an abstract plan stored outside the immediate body of the operator. When later engineers feed punched cards into calculating machines, the visual resemblance is not the whole story, but it is not nothing either. A culture learns long before AI that procedure can be detached from muscle and embedded in systems. You also notice how much of early computing grows out of bureaucracy as much as brilliance. Census tabulation, insurance mathematics, railway schedules, accounting, scientific tables, naval calculations, and administrative records all create pressure for machines that can handle repetitive, symbolic labor. Herman Hollerith's tabulating systems, developed for late 19th century census work, are not intelligence in any rich sense, yet they remind you that states and businesses helped build the computational world through ordinary needs for sorting and counting. The future of AI will later seem glamorous or frightening, depending on who tells the story, but one of its ancestors is simply paperwork on an impossible scale. The dream of thinking machines is born partly in war and mathematics, yes, but also in offices, full of forms, ledgers, and the human exhaustion caused by routine information work. There is another important emotional note in the prehistory. Formalization attracts people because it offers relief from ambiguity. To represent reasoning in symbols is to believe, at least for a moment, that confusion can be made tractable. The 19th and early 20th centuries are full of such hopes. Scientific management, administrative rationality, catalogs, classifications, filing systems, standard forms all express a wider modern appetite for order. AI will inherit this appetite, sometimes fruitfully and sometimes too confidently. When you stand in the lineage before the term artificial intelligence exists, you can already feel the double edge. To formalize is to gain power. It is also to risk mistaking the formalized slice for the whole of reality. This caution, too, belongs to the beginning. And in the wartime rooms, the human side never disappears. The mythology of machines can make it sound as though the future arrived by itself, humming out of vacuum tubes. But the actual scene is full of bodies, clerks carrying forms, operators changing settings, mathematicians arguing over methods, engineers tracing faults, linguists and analysts supplying context, supervisors deciding which signals deserve attention. A machine extends a system of work. It does not abolish it. This pattern will persist far into the AI age. Even the most advanced computational systems depend on human curation, framing, interpretation, maintenance, and correction. The history begins that way. Beneath every cold cabinet, there is a social arrangement. Beneath every formal procedure, there is a decision about what matters enough to formalize. If you walk slowly enough through these overlapping developments, you notice that artificial intelligence begins not as one invention, but as a convergence. There is the lineage of formal logic. There is the lineage of mechanical and then electronic calculation. There is the wartime need for speed and procedure. There is the dawning comparison between neural systems and information systems. There is the growing administrative world with its endless appetite for sorting, classifying, tabulating, and predicting. None of these streams alone creates AI, yet each contributes to the peculiar confidence of the mid-20th century, the growing sense that thought may contain components susceptible to representation. The idea is not that machines will feel as humans feel or desire as humans desire. The early hope is more modest and more radical. Perhaps some forms of reasoning are not mysterious substances, but organized processes. And now, as the first part of the story settles, you return for a moment to the wartime room where we began. The pencils still scratch, the operators still move with tired care. Nothing about the scene looks like the slick science fiction of later decades. No one would mistake the humming cabinets for companions or conversational partners. And still, the modern age of thinking machines is quietly germinating here. A human team formulates a problem. A machine executes constrained operations at great speed. The results are interpreted, corrected, and fed back into further human judgment. This dance between formal procedure and human oversight will remain with AI for a long time. The machine is cold, literal, and brittle. It does not know that lives depend on what passes through it. Yet it proves something unforgettable. Processes once guarded as the province of the mind can be distributed across paper, rules, circuitry, and labor. That realization is enough to carry you into the post-war world, where the question will finally be asked more openly and more daringly. The second part opens after the war, but not in peace as comfort is usually imagined. You are standing in a corridor that smells faintly of polish, paper, and warm insulation. The machine room nearby gives off a steady heat. Cabinets line the walls like patient wardrobes, full of invisible activity. A reel turns. A light blinks. Somewhere a printer chatters out a result that must still be read by a human being who understands why it matters. The urgency of war has softened into the seriousness of research, yet the atmosphere is no less charged. The world has seen what programmable machinery can do under pressure. Now a quieter question drifts through universities, government offices, and laboratories. If these machines can calculate, compare, sort, and transform symbols, what else might be possible? You are no longer only in the age of code-breaking. You are at the beginning of the post-war imagination, when the computer starts to become not just a device, but an intellectual challenge. At the center of this new mood stands Alan Turing. He is not alone, and it would be unfair to turn a broad history into a single biography, but his presence in the story feels like a clear bell in cold air. Before the war, He had already described the abstract logic of computation. During the war, he helped with code breaking. After the war, he turns again toward the larger question that now seems impossible to ignore. In 1950, he publishes a paper titled Computing Machinery and Intelligence, and the first line asks, with disarming simplicity, can machines think? The sentence becomes famous, but what matters just as much is Turing's method of approaching it. He senses immediately that the verb think will lead people into metaphysical arguments with no end. So he proposes a different route, the imitation game. If a machine can engage in a textual conversation well enough that a human judge cannot reliably distinguish it from a person, perhaps the old confidence about what only humans can do needs to be reconsidered. It is a practical reframing, almost gentle in tone, but enormous in consequence. You stand for a moment inside that proposal and feel what makes it so influential. Turing does not claim that machines secretly possess souls or inner experience identical to ours. He shifts attention from invisible essence to observable performance. Intelligence, at least in one meaningful sense, may be judged by what a system can do in interaction. This move changes the history of AI because it replaces vague wonder with a research horizon. Language, conversation, problem-solving, adaptation, and error correction no longer belong solely to philosophy. They become engineering targets, even if distant ones. Turing also anticipates objections with a mixture of rigor and dry patience. People will say machines only do what they are told. People will say surprise is impossible. People will invoke consciousness, creativity, feeling, or theological limits. He does not claim to settle every objection for all time. Instead, he clears conceptual space. He makes it intellectually respectable to ask what capacities might emerge from computation without first demanding a full theory of mind. Yet Turing's world is not made of thought experiments alone. You continue through the late 1940s and early 1950s and see institutions trying to decide what computers are for. Some still treat them primarily as instruments for numerical work. Ballistics, weather, atomic research, census processing, accounting. Others begin to suspect that symbolic manipulation may matter just as much. A machine that can follow logical instructions need not limit itself to numbers that represent quantities. It can also handle numbers that encode words, categories, rules, and relations. The distinction feels obvious to later generations, but at the time it opens a vast field. In lecture halls and research notes, words like learning, translation, pattern recognition, and game playing begin to circulate around computers with an odd combination of excitement and caution. You can sense that a line has been crossed. The machine has become a possible site for studying intelligence itself. Another figure enters the scene, Norbert Wiener, whose work on cybernetics helps widen the frame. Feedback, control, self-regulation, communication across machines, organisms, and systems. These themes give the post-war world a new vocabulary. Suddenly, the boundaries between biology, engineering, psychology, and organization theory seem more permeable than they once did. A thermostat, an anti-aircraft predictor, a nervous system, and a social institution may not be the same kind of thing, yet they can sometimes be described using related ideas about signals, correction, and response. Cybernetics does not become the sole ancestor of AI, but it contributes to the atmosphere in which people take machine behavior seriously as a way of thinking about intelligence. In a quieter room, perhaps one lined with filing cabinets and oscilloscopes, you can imagine researchers realizing that mind may not be a sealed chamber. It may be a process embedded in loops of perception, memory, action, and adjustment. During these same years, the first demonstrations of what would later be called AI begin to emerge. Game playing becomes an especially attractive arena because it offers rules, goals, and measurable success. Chess, checkers, and simple puzzles promise a clean way to test problem solving. The appeal is obvious as soon as you sit with it. Games are formal worlds. They allow search, evaluation, and strategy to be represented in manageable form. A system does not have to understand all of life to perform impressively inside a bounded domain. The post-war imagination seizes on this insight. If a machine can choose promising moves in a game, perhaps it can choose promising inferences in logic or promising translations in language. The analogies are imperfect, but they are energizing. They allow researchers to build prototypes that make intelligence seem operational, not merely speculative. In 1956 at Dartmouth College, a summer workshop gives the field its lasting name. Artificial intelligence. John McCarthy is central to the event, and the proposal behind it carries the characteristic optimism of the era. The researchers involved believe that aspects of learning and intelligence can, in principle, be described so precisely that a machine can be made to simulate them. The confidence is almost startling when read from a later vantage point. But if you place yourself in that room and remember what had recently happened, formal logic maturing, digital computation becoming real, wartime codebreaking proving the value of mechanized procedure, feedback theory flourishing, early programs already solving restricted tasks, the boldness becomes easier to understand. It is not mere fantasy. It is a leap from genuine successes. The problem is not that the leap is irrational. The problem is that the distance ahead is larger than most of them realize. Around Dartmouth and beyond, several strands develop. Alan Newell and Herbert Simon create the logic theorist, which can prove some theorems in propositional logic. Later, they work on the general problem solver, a name that captures both the ambition and the innocence of the age. The hope is that a formal apparatus for search and symbolic manipulation might generalize across many domains. McCarthy develops the Lisp programming language, which will become especially important for symbolic AI because of its flexibility in handling lists and symbolic expressions. Marvin Minsky emerges as a vivid and ambitious presence. Claude Shannon continues to influence the field through information theory and chess. Arthur Samuel works on machine learning through checkers. The laboratories of the late 1950s do not yet contain modern AI, but they do contain a powerful new belief. Intelligence may be built from representations, rules, search procedures, and learning, mechanisms that can be explicitly engineered. The optimism of the period is helped by the nature of the early demonstrations. In controlled settings, programs can appear uncannily competent. A theorem prover succeeds on a formal task. A game-playing system selects a strong move. A symbolic routine solves a puzzle that would have looked quite mental to an observer from an earlier century. The temptation is obvious. If a machine can do this now, perhaps much broader success is only a matter of more memory, better programming, and a few conceptual refinements. Some researchers speak in horizons of decades. Translation between human languages may arrive soon. Common sense reasoning may not be so far away. Vision might yield to formal description. You, moving through these rooms with the luxury of hindsight, can feel both the thrill and the fragility. Narrow successes are real, yet the world outside toy problems remains thick with ambiguity. Human language is messy. Perception is noisy. Context is vast. Much of what people do effortlessly depends on background knowledge that no one has yet learned how to represent completely. Still, the symbolic dream deserves to be understood on its own terms. In mid-century AI, intelligence often means the manipulation of explicit representations according to rules. A problem is encoded. A search space is defined. Heuristics guide the system toward promising paths. This approach is not foolish. In many domains, it is elegant and effective. It reflects the heritage of formal logic and mathematics, and it matches the strengths of the machines available at the time. You can imagine the pleasure of seeing a carefully designed program traverse a problem space and arrive at a conclusion that feels, in miniature, like reasoning. There is a craftsman's beauty in it. The code is not merely running calculations. It is arranging symbols in ways that seem meaningful. To researchers who had inherited Turing's question, such moments must have felt like small confirmations that they were not chasing a mirage. At the same time, another lineage remains alive beneath the more visible symbolic work. Frank Rosenblatt's perceptron, introduced in the late 1950s, represents a different intuition about intelligence. Instead of handwriting elaborate symbolic rules, perhaps a system can learn patterns from examples through a network inspired, however loosely, by neurons. The perceptron is limited, but its existence matters because it preserves the idea that intelligence might emerge from adaptive weighted connections rather than from explicit symbolic manipulation alone. For a while, the symbolic and connectionist visions coexist, sometimes in collaboration, sometimes in rivalry. The future is not yet decided. The field is small enough that personalities, institutional loyalties, and philosophical preferences matter greatly. What you hear in seminars and corridors is not only technical disagreement, but competing pictures of mind itself. Is intelligence primarily reasoning with symbols? Is it pattern learning? Is it control and feedback? Is it embodied adaptation? The answer, history will suggest, is not singular. As the 1960s approach, the post-war imagination grows larger than the machines supporting it. Funding from governments and agencies helps sustain ambition. Cold War pressures lend further urgency. Machine translation attracts interest because it promises strategic and scientific value. Speech, vision, and robotics begin to appear on research agendas. If a machine could read, hear, move, and converse, the boundary between calculation and intelligence would narrow dramatically. Yet the deeper difficulty is becoming clearer even before disappointment sets in. The world is not composed of neat, fully specified puzzles. It is full of exceptions, background assumptions, shifting contexts, and meanings that rest on vast, unstated knowledge. The child who understands that a cup can be empty, useful, breakable, and still the same object across changing viewpoints possesses a kind of common sense that no laboratory demo has captured. A sentence that seems obvious to a human reader may depend on an entire invisible world of expectations. The post-war pioneers have opened the question magnificently, but the answers remain partial. There is also the matter of Turing's practical engineering imagination, which can get lost behind the philosophical fame of his 1950 question. After the war, he works on ideas for the automatic computing engine, and although institutional delays and other factors complicate what is built and when, the broader point remains. Turing does not treat computation as a merely abstract toy. He thinks in terms of machines that can store instructions, shift states, and perform varied operations under program control. This matters because the post-war imagination is strongest where theory and machinery meet. The question, can machines think, does not float free of hardware. It is tied to a new class of devices that appear general enough to invite the comparison. Without that physical shift, the philosophy would feel idle. With it, even skeptics must answer more carefully. The post-war years also nourish a rich culture of speculation about mind in science fiction, philosophy, and public discourse. Newspapers simplify. Popular magazines dramatize. Researchers speak to funders, journalists, and one another in languages that are not always identical. In this widening circle, the computer becomes a symbol of the age. Cold, modern, exact, perhaps threatening, perhaps liberating. Some people fear dehumanization, others anticipate abundance. This cultural atmosphere matters because AI has always been more than a technical field. It is a site where societies project hopes and anxieties about reason, labor, control, and uniqueness. By the late 1950s, when early programs begin to impress small audiences, the public is ready to hear in them either the promise of mechanical brilliance or the first warning of mechanical rivals. The imagination outruns the code, but it helps determine which lines of work receive attention. Inside laboratories, early natural language work reveals both the attraction and the danger of the enterprise. Language feels like the royal road to mind because it seems inseparable from reasoning and social life. If a machine can manipulate sentences meaningfully, perhaps intelligence is within reach. Yet language also exposes every hidden dependency. Pronouns require context. Common verbs conceal physical assumptions. Humor, tone, background knowledge, and ambiguity resist simple formalization. Even when a toy dialogue works, the success is often scaffolded by severe constraints invisible to casual observers. This is why the post-war age is so instructive. It produces genuine breakthroughs and genuine illusions side by side. A researcher can be wrong about the timeline and still right about the destination. Another can be right about the difficulty and still underestimate what scale will later make possible. AI history rarely divides neatly into heroes and fools. It is usually a matter of partial insight meeting partial means. There is a final tenderness in this era that is easy to miss. Many pioneers are not trying to diminish human beings by comparing them to machines. They are trying to understand intelligence more clearly by testing what parts of it can be reproduced. Even when their language sounds mechanistic, It often comes from curiosity rather than contempt. To build a theorem prover is not to deny human mathematics. To explore machine language is not to deny human conversation. It is to ask with unusual seriousness, which elements of thought depend on structure, and which depend on something still outside our grasp. This experimental humility survives beneath the confident grant proposals and bold public claims. It is one of the reasons the field endures disappointment without collapsing altogether. Before you leave this era, the figure of Turing returns one more time, not as a monument, but as a reminder. His thought experiment was never merely about deception in conversation. It was a way of loosening the grip of older certainties. It allowed people to ask whether intelligence might be recognized through behavior and performance, rather than by appeal to some hidden essence available only to human beings. In the decades that follow, researchers will disagree sharply about methods, and some will reject the test as too shallow or too anthropocentric. Yet the post-war inheritance remains. Computers are now part of the philosophical vocabulary of mind. The machine has become both tool and mirror. By the end of this second movement, you feel the field suspended between earnest achievement and overreach. The pioneers have named AI, sketched some of its methods, and given it an unforgettable question. They have also, almost without noticing, prepared the ground for disappointment. The dream has grown large. Reality will answer more slowly. The third part begins in a laboratory full of confidence. It is late enough in the 20th century for computers to feel established, but early enough that many of their limitations are still physical, audible, and impossible to ignore. Fans hum. Cabinets stand like obedient cliffs. Terminals glow on a screen or printout. A program has just done something clever in a simplified world. It has solved an algebra problem, proved a theorem, manipulated virtual blocks, recognized a limited pattern, or selected a move in a game. The people around it do not cheer loudly. The mood is more academic than theatrical. Yet beneath the calm you can feel a dangerous warmth. The belief that broad machine intelligence may now be only a few breakthroughs away. This is how the story of AI often moves. A real success appears. It is narrow but striking. The mind, eager for lines that continue upward, imagines the rest. Then the world, patient and complicated, pushes back. In the 1960s, optimism has many homes. Symbolic AI remains influential. If intelligence consists in reasoning over explicit representations, then progress depends on better knowledge structures, better search strategies, and more efficient programming. Systems can be built to manipulate blocks in toy environments, solve logic problems, or answer constrained questions about restricted worlds. Joseph Weissenbaum's ELIZA, though simple in mechanism, demonstrates how readily human beings project understanding onto conversational behavior. Shaky the robot, developed at SRI in the late 1960s, integrates perception, planning, and action in a controlled environment. It moves slowly by modern standards, and its world is heavily simplified, yet it offers a powerful image, a machine sensing part of its surroundings, representing a goal and choosing steps. To those living inside the period, such projects can feel like beginnings rather than curiosities. When the future is imagined from a laboratory bench, every prototype seems like an embryo. Machine translation carries similar hope. During the Cold War, automatic translation between Russian and English appears not only intellectually ambitious, but strategically useful. Early demonstrations encourage funding. But language soon proves less obedient than headlines suggest. Words do not map neatly across contexts. Meaning is shaped by syntax, idiom, domain knowledge, and assumptions no dictionary can fully hold. The ALPAC report of 1966, critical of machine translation progress in the United States, becomes one of the early cold showers for AI-adjacent optimism. Promises had moved faster than performance. What looked manageable in carefully chosen examples became stubborn in real use. If you pause here, the lesson is gentle but important. A laboratory success is not false because it does not scale. It is simply incomplete. AI will relearn this lesson again and again. Another line of tension gathers around neural approaches. Frank Rosenblatt's perceptron had generated excitement, especially because it suggested learning from data rather than relying entirely on hand-coded symbolic rules. But enthusiasm cools after Marvin Minsky and Seymour Papert, in their 1969 book on perceptrons, analyze important limitations of simple single-layer systems. Their critique is technically specific, though later remembered in broader and sometimes distorted form. What matters historically is that it contributes to a shift in attention and funding away from connectionism for a time. The symbolic camp retains prestige. Again, the field narrows around what seems tractable. To you, walking slowly through this period, the emotional pattern matters almost as much as the technical one. Researchers are not merely solving equations. They are choosing which picture of intelligence deserves belief, money, graduate students, and institutional power. The winters that later arrive are not only failures of machines, they are corrections to human expectation. One of the most famous of those corrections comes in Britain with the Lighthill Report of 1973. Commissioned to assess AI research, the report is sharply critical of the field's progress outside narrow toy domains. It argues, in effect, that researchers have not overcome the combinatorial explosion that arises when problems grow in complexity. Search spaces become enormous. Simplified demonstrations fail to generalize. The result is a reduction in support for much British AI work. In the United States and elsewhere, the chill is distributed through multiple disappointments and funding decisions rather than a single report, but the effect is related. The phrase AI winter later becomes popular because it captures something people felt, not extinction, but cold. The atmosphere changes. Claims are received with suspicion. Budgets tighten. Projects shrink. For some, the field becomes professionally risky. The big dream remains, but it retreats into smaller rooms. And yet winter in science is rarely total silence. Under the snow, techniques keep developing, data keep accumulating, and a younger generation quietly learns what the previous one overstated. During the 1970s and into the 1980s, expert systems bring a powerful revival. Instead of trying to reproduce general intelligence all at once, researchers focus on narrow professional domains where expert knowledge can be encoded explicitly. Systems such as Dendril and Mycin show that a computer can perform impressively in constrained tasks like chemical analysis or medical recommendation when provided with well-structured rules. In industry, XCon helps configure computer orders at Digital Equipment Corporation. These applications matter because they are not only academic curiosities, they save time, organize specialized knowledge, and produce economic value. Businesses and governments once again become interested. The promise of AI shifts from grand imitation of mind toward practical capture of expertise. If you sit for a while beside an expert system, its strengths and limitations become equally clear. The knowledge base can be rich. The inference rules can be elegant. In a stable domain with clearly articulated expertise, the results can be genuinely helpful. But maintaining such systems is laborious. Experts do not always know how to state what they know. Rules multiply. Exceptions breed further exceptions. The world changes. A program that performs well in a bounded setting may become brittle when conditions drift. It does not know what it does not know. It lacks the flexible, low-level, hard-to-name common sense that humans bring even to highly specialized tasks. By the late 1980s, many expert systems prove expensive to maintain, narrower than hoped, and awkward outside curated environments. Commercial enthusiasm cools. Another winter arrives, this time shaped not only by intellectual disappointment, but by market fatigue. It is a familiar rhythm by now: breakthrough, inflation of claims, confrontation with complexity, contraction. Meanwhile, other paths continue with less noise. Statistical methods grow in importance. Researchers working in speech recognition, pattern classification, information retrieval, and probabilistic modeling often proceed with a more empirical temperament. Instead of trying to handcraft intelligence through symbolic rules alone, they treat many problems as matters of uncertainty, estimation, and learning from data. Hidden Markov models become influential in speech. Bayesian reasoning gains practical use in many domains. Decision theory, optimization, and statistical learning theory gather force. These communities are sometimes culturally distinct from the classic symbolic AI world, yet their work will eventually reshape what mainstream AI means. The transition is subtle at first. It does not come with one dramatic manifesto. It arrives because systems that learn from data and manage uncertainty often work better on messy, real-world tasks than systems built solely from brittle, explicit rules. Neural networks, too, begin their slow return. In the 1980s, renewed attention to multi-layer networks and backpropagation helps re-legitimize connectionist ideas. Researchers, such as Geoffrey Hinton, David Rumelhart, Ronald Williams, and many others contribute to the revival. Still, the computers of the era limit what can be done at scale. Data sets are smaller. Processing power is dear. The networks that later generations will casually call deep are not yet practical in the same way. But the conceptual foundation matters. Learning distributed internal representations, rather than relying only on handcrafted symbolic descriptions, starts to look promising again. At the same time, debates continue. Some critics see neural networks as opaque curve-fitting. Some enthusiasts of symbolic AI see them as lacking structure, explanation, and compositional clarity. Each camp understands something real. Each also misses part of what the other can offer. History will spend decades weaving these threads together, though never perfectly. Some of the period's most revealing projects are beautiful, precisely because they are limited. Terry Winograd's SHRDLU, developed around 1970, can understand and respond to commands in a miniature blocks world. Within that tiny universe, it appears surprisingly competent. You can ask it to stack, move, compare, and explain. The system looks conversational because the world behind the language has been simplified enough to make reference manageable. Historians often return to SHRDLU because it captures the central drama of early AI so clearly. Inside a clean little world, symbolic methods can look almost magical. Outside it, the real world rushes back with its unbounded mess. The lesson is not that such systems were failures. The lesson is that bounded environments flatter our intuitions about generality. What works wonderfully in a toy universe may not survive the first gust of ordinary life. The robotic and vision efforts of these decades reveal a similar truth. To identify edges, objects, and scenes in the world turns out to demand enormous amounts of background structure. Light changes, angles shift, objects occlude one another, surfaces reflect, bodies move unpredictably. A room that seems effortlessly intelligible to a child becomes a storm of ambiguity when reduced to pixels and sensors. In hindsight, this may sound obvious, but much of AI history consists in discovering how much human beings know without knowing that they know it. Everyday perception is dense with skill. So is movement. So is common sense. Each time researchers tried to formalize one of these abilities, they exposed hidden layers beneath it. This is one reason disappointment was so common. AI did not fail because its questions were foolish. It struggled because ordinary intelligence contains more invisible machinery than early pioneers could readily count. By the 1990s, the field is also changing culturally. Benchmarks, competitions, shared datasets, and engineering pragmatism begin to matter more. Researchers increasingly care not only about whether a system looks intelligent in a demonstration, but about measurable performance under standardized evaluation. This shift brings discipline. It also changes the social meaning of success. A result can be compared, reproduced, scaled, and improved in a more cumulative way. The modern machine learning culture of leaderboards and empirical comparison does not yet dominate everything, but its spirit is arriving. In some respects, this is the field learning from its own winters. Fewer grand pronouncements, more measurable gains, more attention to error rates, baselines, and deployment. The romance of intelligence does not disappear, but it is increasingly carried by metrics. And under all these changes runs a quieter continuity. The field never fully abandons old ideas. Symbolic methods remain useful in planning, verification, expert reasoning, and knowledge representation. Probabilistic approaches flourish in uncertain environments. Neural methods improve pattern learning. The history is not a sequence in which one school kills the others forever. It is more like a braided river whose channels widen and narrow over time. Public attention tends to focus on whichever current is moving fastest, but the whole system remains connected. This matters because the future rarely belongs to one purity. Hybrid systems, layered tools, and recycled insights are normal in technology, and AI is no exception. Winters were never total freezes. They were seasons in which some branches became less visible while roots kept working underground. The 1990s and early 2000s feel different. Computers become more common, networks more pervasive, digital data more abundant. The internet does not by itself create AI, but it changes scale in a profound way. Suddenly there is more text, more images, more user behavior, more logs, more signals. Problems once described abstractly can now be fed with masses of examples. Machine learning broadens through support vector machines, ensemble methods, probabilistic graphical models, and other techniques that often outperform older symbolic methods on important tasks. Search engines rank pages. Recommendation systems suggest products and media. Spam filters improve. Fraud detection becomes more statistical. Speech recognition gets better in practical increments. Many of these achievements are not packaged as philosophical dramas about mind, yet they matter deeply. AI becomes less a distant promise and more a collection of deployed systems embedded in ordinary digital life. Public milestones still play an important role in shaping perception. In 1997, IBM's Deep Blue defeats Garry Kasparov in chess. It is a watershed, not because chess equals general intelligence, but because the match dramatizes machine superiority in a domain long associated with strategic thought. The public does not always care how much of the result depends on search, specialized evaluation, and brute computational force. What people feel is simpler. A machine has beaten one of the world's greatest players at a revered intellectual game. Later, IBM Watson wins on Jeopardy, another event rich in symbolism. These moments do not solve the problem of intelligence, but they periodically restore the sense that the boundary is moving. They also reveal something about AI history. Humans are most impressed when machines succeed at tasks we have culturally decorated as marks of intellect. Success in ad targeting may change society more than a chess match, but the chess match changes the imagination. Then comes the acceleration associated with modern deep learning. The ingredients had existed separately for some time. Larger datasets, more powerful processors, algorithmic refinements, and persistence among researchers who continued exploring neural approaches when the field's center of attention lay elsewhere. In 2012, the success of AlexNet in the ImageNet competition becomes a widely cited turning point because it demonstrates striking improvements in image classification using deep convolutional neural networks trained at scale. The result feels like a door swinging open. Soon speech recognition, image analysis, translation, and many other tasks begin improving more quickly. Researchers discover that representation learning on large datasets can outperform handcrafted features across domains. The old connectionist intuition, once discounted or constrained by hardware, returns with new authority. The revival is not magic. It is the product of decades of ideas meeting sufficient scale. Even here, however, the old pattern remains. Enthusiasm surges. Headlines become bold. Investors return. Companies reorganize around machine learning. Yet each real success again creates temptations toward overstatement. A model that labels images well may fail absurdly outside its training distribution. A language system may generate plausible nonsense. A game-playing network may dominate with informal rules, but know nothing of the physical world. The history of AI teaches patience, precisely because progress is real. When change is genuine, people rush to universalize it. They forget how often intelligence in one domain does not transfer cleanly to another. They forget that performance can look deep while depending on narrow scaffolding. Still, it would be equally mistaken to dismiss the breakthroughs. They alter science, engineering, commerce, and culture. The lesson of winter is not that AI never advances. It is that it advances unevenly, and that humans repeatedly confuse local strength with total arrival. As this third movement settles, you can feel why the field kept surviving its disappointments. The dream of thinking machines was never sustained by hype alone. Beneath the cycles, there were always real methods, real applications, real questions, and real improvements. Each winter removed illusions, but also clarified the terrain. Researchers learned to respect data, scale, uncertainty, hardware limits, and evaluation. They learned that common sense is hard, that embodiment matters, that language is slippery, that toy worlds flatter, that demonstrations seduce. They also learned that apparently defeated ideas can return with new force when conditions change. Connectionism comes back. Statistical learning rises. Symbolic ideas remain useful in places. The quiet history of AI is therefore not simply a march or a loop, but an alternation between imagination and correction. You leave this part not with cynicism, but with a calmer faith. Progress survives precisely because reality resists it enough to make it honest. The last part begins in the present, though the present is strangely layered with the past. You are sitting in an ordinary room. Perhaps there is a laptop nearby. Perhaps a phone cooling on the table. Perhaps only the faint glow of a screen that has already dimmed for the night. Nothing around you suggests the giant cabinets of the early computer age. The machine no longer announces itself with rows of relays or spinning tapes. It hides inside polished surfaces, distant server farms, invisible networks, and interfaces designed to feel almost conversational. You type a question. A system replies. You speak into a device. It transcribes your words. A recommendation appears before you think to ask. A translation arrives in seconds. An image is labeled. A route is suggested. A face is recognized. A paragraph is generated. The old dream now lives in everyday gestures. And because it has become ordinary so quickly, it risks becoming ahistorical. The smoothness of the interface hides the long path that made it possible, so the story widens one final time. Modern AI matters now because old ideas, once fragile and partial, have accumulated enough support to shape ordinary life. Logic still matters. Search still matters. Statistics matters enormously. Neural learning matters. Optimization matters. Vast datasets matter. Specialized hardware matters. Distributed computing matters. Human labor matters too, though it is often hidden. The annotators, engineers, evaluators, moderators, researchers, infrastructure workers, and domain experts whose effort underwrites the apparent autonomy of systems presented as intelligent. When you look carefully, modern AI is not a single thing. It is a layered stack of concepts, institutions, resources, and decisions. Yet history helps you see continuity inside the complexity. The post-war question about machine thought did not vanish. It diffused into products, services, infrastructures, and public debates. The code room became the platform. A particularly important bridge between old ideas and current systems appears in the rise of deep learning after 2012 and the transformer architecture after 2017. The details can remain gentle here, but the broad point matters. Earlier generations had already explored neural learning, sequence modeling, and distributed representations. What changed was the combination of scale, optimization, hardware, and architectural choices that let systems absorb patterns from vast corpora of text, images, audio, and more. The transformer made it easier to model relationships across sequences in parallel, which proved immensely useful for language and other modalities. From there, large language models and related foundation models emerged not as magical departures from history, but as concentrated inheritances of many older lines. Probabilistic prediction, symbolic corpora, neural learning, high-performance computation, and decades of research into representation. The old desire to make machines handle symbols at scale returned through statistics powerful enough to look, at times like reasoning. Public milestones again helped people feel the shift. In 2016, AlphaGo's victory over Lee Sedol showed that machines could excel in Go, a game long thought resistant to brute force methods because of its immense search space and its reliance on positional intuition. The system's success drew on deep neural networks, reinforcement learning, search, and vast computational effort. It was not general intelligence, but it was a sign that new combinations of methods could crack domains once treated as protected territory. Later, generative models capable of producing essays, code, images, music-like outputs, and conversation made the change feel intimate. Chess victories impressed the public from a distance. Conversational and creative systems moved closer to everyday language and self-expression. They entered classrooms, offices, studios, and homes. For many people, this was the first time the old philosophical question of machine intelligence ceased to feel abstract. That intimacy is part of why contemporary debate can become heated so quickly. A search ranking model may shape attention at scale, but many users never experience it as a personal counterpart. A conversational model, by contrast, presents itself through dialogue, one of the oldest and most human forms of exchange. People naturally read intention, style, confidence, and even personality into fluent language. This is not entirely irrational. Language is how human intelligence often appears to one another. Yet history advises caution. Eliza already showed how easily people attribute understanding to surface interaction. Modern systems are far more capable than Eliza, but the interpretive temptation remains. Fluency can exceed grounding. Coherence can exceed truth. Confidence can exceed reliability. Understanding these tools requires both ordinary intuition and deliberate resistance to ordinary intuition. The machine sounds near to us, and that very nearness can distort judgment. The material costs of AI also become more visible when you place modern systems back into history. Intelligence in machine form may look ethereal on a screen, but it depends on minds, chips, cooling systems, data centers, electricity, global logistics, and labor distributed across continents. Training and serving large models can require enormous computational resources. This does not make the work illegitimate, but it makes it physical. The dream of thought in silicon rests on land use, energy grids, supply chains, and industrial policy. In this sense, the quiet history of thinking machines joins the broader history of infrastructure. Bletchley Park had cables, rooms, operators, and budgets. Today's AI has cloud platforms, semiconductor fabs, undersea cables, and power contracts. The scale is different, but the principle is familiar. Computation has always been embodied in worldly arrangements, however abstract its outputs may seem. There is also a human labor story running beneath the rhetoric of automation. Data must be collected, cleaned, labeled, filtered, translated, and evaluated. Safety policies are written and revised. Harmful outputs are tested. Interfaces are designed. Domain experts judge whether a model's answer is useful or dangerous. Users themselves, through interaction, provide signals that shape future systems. Some labor is highly paid and prestigious. Some is repetitive, outsourced, and nearly invisible. The present thus repeats a foundational pattern from the code rooms and data processing offices of earlier eras. Machines extend organized human work rather than replacing it in any simple total sense. Even where jobs are displaced or transformed, new layers of coordination and maintenance appear. AI history becomes clearer when you see not only clever algorithms, but also the social systems in which they are embedded. Education offers another lens on why the history matters now. When students can query a model for summaries, outlines, explanations, translations, or code, the meaning of learning shifts. Some fears are old. Calculators, search engines, and online encyclopedias all once raised questions about memory and competence. Yet generative systems reach further into expression and composition. They can help draft the very thing by which understanding is often displayed. This does not automatically destroy education, but it forces institutions to distinguish more carefully between producing an answer and building a mind capable of judgment. The same distinction mattered, in another way, when early AI researchers asked whether outward performance was enough to count as thought. In classrooms today, that philosophical issue becomes practical. What do we actually want students to know, to practice, to internalize, and to be able to do without assistance? Old questions about intelligence return disguised as pedagogy. Scientific research, too, is being reshaped. Machine learning can aid protein structure prediction, materials discovery, drug design, astronomy, climate modeling, and the management of complex datasets. Here, the meaning of AI is often less theatrical than in public conversations about conversation or art. A system may not need to seem human-like in order to accelerate discovery. It only needs to model useful regularities and help experts navigate possibility spaces more effectively. This is historically important because it echoes some of the oldest strengths of computing, assisting human inquiry through speed, search, simulation, and pattern detection. The modern era expands these capacities and places them beside generative tools that attract more public attention. In the quieter background, however, AI continues one of computation's deepest traditions, amplifying the reach of disciplined human investigation. And finally, history matters now because it restores proportion. People living inside any technological wave are tempted by total language. Everything will change. Nothing real has changed. The machine understands us. The machine understands nothing. Jobs will vanish. Jobs will remain untouched. Intelligence has been created. Intelligence has been simulated. These opposites thrive when memory is short. But the long history from Enigma to AI suggests a steadier habit of mind. Transformations are real but uneven. Capabilities expand, but not all at once. Some fears prove exaggerated. Some warnings arrive too late. Institutions adapt badly before they adapt better. Public language swings between awe and contempt while practice becomes ordinary. If you keep the older story in view, you can meet the present with less drama and more clarity. That may be the quiet gift of history itself. One reason this matters is that history protects you from two opposite mistakes. The first mistake is to treat present-day AI as magic, as if immense capabilities had appeared from nowhere. The second mistake is to dismiss current systems because they are unlike human beings in important respects. Both errors flatten reality. If you understand the long arc from formal logic and code-breaking through symbolic AI, statistics, and deep learning, you see that today's systems are neither miracles nor trivial toys. They are engineered artifacts built on cumulative insight. Their achievements are real, and so are their limitations. A language model can produce coherent text, summarize documents, translate, reason in partial ways, write code, and imitate tone. Yet it can also hallucinate, flatten nuance, inherit bias, and fail unpredictably outside patterns it has absorbed. History teaches you to hold both sides at once. Strength without myth, weakness without dismissal. The spread of AI into daily life changes work in ways both visible and quiet. Search engines had already taught people to outsource memory of facts and locations. Recommendation systems taught platforms to anticipate taste and hold attention. Predictive models entered finance, logistics, insurance, advertising, and fraud detection long before generative systems became household topics. Now, newer tools reshape drafting, design, customer service, education, programming, medical assistance, and administrative labor. Some tasks are sped up, some are transformed, some are deskilled, some are expanded. The effect is uneven, which makes it harder to narrate cleanly. A radiologist, a copywriter, a warehouse planner, a teacher, a lawyer, and a game artist may all encounter AI differently. For one person, it is a helpful autocomplete. For another, it is a managerial pressure. For another, it is a creative partner. For another, it is a threat to income. Thinking machines matter now because they are no longer confined to laboratories or symbolic contests. They participate in institutions. The ethical questions surrounding modern AI are therefore not decorative additions to the technical story. They are part of the story itself. Earlier generations already worried about control, trust, and responsibility, even if the scale was smaller. Today, those questions arrive with more urgency because models can influence hiring, policing, credit, medicine, education, communication, and public discourse. A system trained on historical data may inherit historical bias. A classifier may perform differently across groups. A generative model may produce falsehoods with a calm, persuasive tone. An optimization system may amplify engagement at social cost. A facial recognition system may be deployed in ways that reshape privacy and power. None of this comes from nowhere. The history of AI has always included a tension between technical possibility and social consequence. When old formal dreams harden into infrastructure, society must decide what kind of mediation it is willing to accept. The question of opacity also grows sharper in the present. Symbolic systems at least offered the comfort of visible rules, even when those rules became unwieldy. Modern machine learning, especially in large neural models, often produces power through representations that are difficult to interpret directly. You can observe behavior, inspect weights, measure outputs, and develop interpretability tools, but the path from training to response is rarely transparent in an intuitive sense. This does not make the systems mystical, it makes them complicated, yet complication has consequences. If a model helps diagnose illness, recommend parole, filter job applicants, or guide a vehicle, the demand for explanation does not disappear merely because the mechanism is statistical and high-dimensional. Here again, history speaks softly. AI has repeatedly impressed observers before they fully understood what was being built. The wise response is neither panic nor surrender, but disciplined scrutiny. There is another reason the old history matters now. Modern AI has revived the ancient question of what intelligence actually is. If a machine writes fluid prose, composes images, beats champions, predicts protein structures, or generates convincing conversation, what exactly has been achieved? Some people answer quickly, it is merely statistics. Others answer just as quickly, it is already a form of mind. Both responses can harden too soon. Statistical methods are not trivial simply because they are statistical. Human cognition itself depends on patterns extracted from experience, though not only on those patterns. At the same time, outward fluency is not identical to grounded understanding, lived experience, or moral agency. The present becomes easier to inhabit when you resist premature absolutes. The question is not whether machines are simply human or simply nothing. The question is what capacities have been built, by what means, with what reliability, under what constraints, and toward what ends. The present also reminds you that AI is a mirror as much as a machine. Every attempt to formalize perception, planning, language, memory, or creativity reveals something about human beings. We discover that some tasks once thought lofty, such as rapid calculation or chess search, may be easier to mechanize than simple bodily common sense. We discover that language contains patterns vast enough for machines to model statistically, yet meaning in human life remains tied to world experience, social context, embodiment, and responsibility. We discover that creativity can involve recombination and variation, but also intention, risk, taste, and care. In this way, the history of thinking machines is never only about the machines. It is also about the fragments of ourselves that we can state clearly enough to reproduce, and the fragments that remain resistant, fuzzy, situated, or ethically charged. Each technical success is also an anthropological clue. The geopolitical dimension of AI is part of why the subject feels intense in the 21st century. States see strategic value in computation, data, semiconductor supply chains, cyber capability, autonomous systems, and scientific acceleration. Companies see enormous commercial value in platforms, productivity tools, cloud services, and captured user attention. Universities remain vital sources of talent and research, even as industry labs dominate many expensive frontiers. The result is a landscape where open science, proprietary advantage, national security, and public interest collide. This too has precedents. Wartime codebreaking, Cold War funding, and earlier military interest in automation all foreshadow the present. But the scale is wider now. The systems are woven into global networks. Their outputs move through news, art, commerce, bureaucracy, and intimate daily communication. AI matters because its development is no longer just a technical contest. It is an institutional and political fact. And yet, for all this scale, the older humility should not be lost. History counsels calm. Many current systems are astonishingly capable in narrow or medium-broad ways, but they remain dependent on training data, infrastructure, objectives, interfaces, and human framing. They do not float above culture. They are made within it. They reflect incentives, compromises, shortcuts, values, and blind spots. If you remember the cycles of promise and winter, you become less vulnerable to the rhetoric of inevitability. There is nothing inevitable about how societies deploy AI, regulate it, distribute its benefits, or absorb its harms. There is also nothing inevitable about which research directions dominate. Symbolic reasoning may return in hybrid forms. Better world models may emerge. Embodied systems may matter more. Interpretability may improve. New limitations may appear. The past is full of surprises, precisely because the future keeps refusing simple scripts. As the room grows quieter and the final movement of the story settles, you can hear the oldest line beneath the newest noise. The history of AI is not finally a story of metallic rivals waiting to replace humanity. It is a story of human beings trying, step by step, to formalize pieces of thinking so that those pieces can be reproduced in another medium. Sometimes the attempt succeeds brilliantly. Sometimes it fails and teaches caution. Sometimes it changes the world before anyone has language equal to the change. The path from Enigma to modern AI is quiet, not because it lacked consequence, but because it was built through patient accumulations, theorem by theorem, circuit by circuit, paper by paper, dataset by dataset, revision by revision, winter by winter, return by return. When you understand that, the present becomes less like a sudden rupture and more like a long conversation finally audible in everyday life. So you leave this history not with a slogan, but with a steadier picture. The machine that now seems to answer, predict, generate, and assist is made from old questions asked under new conditions. Logic entered circuitry. Code-breaking encouraged formal procedure. Post-war thinkers asked whether behavior could count as evidence of intelligence. Researchers overshot. Learned, narrowed, rebuilt, and learned again. Data grew, hardware improved, networks deepened, institutions invested. Ordinary people began using results before they fully grasped the lineage behind them. That is where we are now, not at the end of the story and not at its first page, but in the middle of a long human experiment. And as you drift toward sleep, the gentlest conclusion may be this one. Thinking machines matter now because they carry the history of our own attempts to understand reasoning, pattern, judgment, and imagination by giving some part of that labor to tools we made with our own restless minds.